Namaskar. We will now start with our next module on the consumer psychographics or the psychological influences on consumer decision making. This module is titled 6.5 and we will be discussing consumer attitudes, belief, effect, attitude and intention, attitude formation and attitude change. So this module 6.5, which we will be completing in a total of 3 sessions, includes the following topics: the definition and meaning of consumer attitude, the nature of attitudes, the functions of attitudes, the structural models of attitudes, the measurement of attitudes, attitude formation and attitude change with respect to the ELM theory, the theory of cognitive dissonance and the attribution theory, and finally the consumer attitudes and implications for a marketer. Today in session 1, we shall be speaking about the definition and meaning of consumer attitude, the nature of attitudes, the functions of attitudes and the structural models of attitudes which we will be discussing. We will be starting with the structural models of attitudes which will be continuing in the next session as well. So, starting with the definition and meaning of consumer attitudes. So, when we talk about an attitude, we actually essentially speaking about some level of favorableness or unfavorableness, positivity or negativity with which we look upon a person, an object, a situation or a thing. Now an individual, each one of us possesses this feeling of favorableness or unfavorableness towards a marketing stimuli. Could be a product or a brand or any of the 4 P's. So we look upon such a marketing stimuli with favorableness or unfavorableness, and this is referred to as consumer attitudes. We will be talking more about attitudes, but let me first talk about as to why this consumer attitudes becomes relevant for us or for relevant in the study of consumer behavior. It is generally perceived that a person who has a favorable attitude towards a product or a brand, the likelihood of his making a purchase is going to be definitely higher. So because of this, it's very important that we study consumer attitudes, and marketers try to understand what leads to development of attitudes, what leads to development of favorable attitudes, and try to devise strategies so as to lead to favorable predispositions and attitude towards his product and service offerings, which will increase the likelihood of the purchase of his product and or brand. Now we will be discussing consumer attitudes in detail. We will be talking about how they are formed, we will be talking about how they are changed, we will be talking about the theoretical various theories underpinning the study of attitudes. But before that, we will start with in general what an attitude is. So let us begin with our discussion. Now, as I just said, an attitude is a feeling of favorableness or unfavorableness with which a person basically directs towards an object. It could be a person, it could be a situation, it could be a thing. It is a learned predisposition to exhibit and act based on an evaluation resulting from a feeling of like, dislike or favorableness or unfavorableness towards the object. So, it is a learned predisposition to exhibit and act out a certain behavior based on an evaluation of likingness or dislikingness, favorableness or unfavorableness. Now, as I just said, a person who has an positive attitude towards a product or service offering is more likely to make a purchase. So, this is what makes the study of attitudes more relevant to us in consumer behavior. So, in terms of consumer behavior, when we speak, consumer attitudes are defined as the inner feeling of favorableness or unfavorableness towards a product or a service offering. Now, Schiffman has defined it very nicely. He says attitudes are an expression of inner feelings that reflect whether a person is favorably or unfavorably predisposed to some object. This object could be a brand, it could be a service or a retail establishment. And attitude formation in turn is the process by which individuals form feelings or opinions towards people, product, ideas, activities and other objects in the environment. So, talking about generally, if we speak about consumer behavior, it is the feeling of likingness or dislikingness, favorableness or unfavorableness towards a product or a service or towards any of the 4 P's. And Schiffman says it's a feeling of it's an expression of inner feelings that reflect whether a person is favorably or unfavorably predisposed. And attitude formation is the process by which individuals form such feelings, opinions, or predispositions towards people or product or ideas or services or other objects in their environment. Now, in terms of a consumer behavior, an attitude is something which is reflective of a consistent favorable or unfavorable feeling that a consumer or a prospect has as a result of his evaluation of an object. So, as a result of an evaluation of an object, a person, a consumer, he could be a consumer or a prospect, begins to have a feeling of likingness or dislikingness towards a product or a service or any of the 4 P's. Now, this feeling of favorableness or unfavorableness is consistent over consistent over a period of time, and it is formed as a result of his evaluation of the object being a product or a service or a brand or a price or a store or an advertisement or a salesperson or any of the promotion mix. So, Schiffman says that it is a learned predisposition to behave in a consistently favorable or an unfavorable manner based on feelings and opinions that result from evaluation of knowledge about the object. So, if we say that it is actually how it's a consistent feeling, how it's reflective of consistent feeling, whether favorable or unfavorable, which people develop due to evaluation of an object. The object could be a product or a service or a brand or any of the 4 P's, and this feeling gets exhibited in the form of a physical act. Now, it is again very important to state here that because it's an inner feeling of like, of dislike, it is not directly observed. Okay. Further, it is also impacted by psychographics like motivation, perception and learning. So because it cannot be observed directly, it can only be inferred. Inferred by seeing by hearing what people say, or by looking at how they behave and what they do. So, attitudes basically can only be inferred from what people say or how people behave and what they do and what they do not do. So, in case a consumer or a prospect who has developed a consistent favorable or unfavorable feeling towards an object based on his evaluation about the object, in case he develops a favorable feeling, we will be able to observe it, we will not be able to observe it directly, we will be able to only infer it. We will be able to infer it through the manner in which he acts, through the manner in which he behaves, or through the manner in what he says. For example, if he talks favorably about it, we will infer that he has a positive attitude towards it. In case he places his hand on the shelf to pull out a particular brand, we say that he has a positive attitude towards it. In case he goes to the shop and asks for it, so he pulls out a particular brand, we will again infer that he has a positive attitude towards it. In case he goes and purchases the same brand again and again, we will again say that he has a positive attitude towards it. So, attitudes are learned predispositions based on feelings of likingness or dislikingness, which get exhibited in an action, and that particular action could actually help us infer whether people have a positive attitude towards it or a negative attitude towards it. So, this is what we mean by an attitude. An attitude, again, as I repeat, is a feeling of favorableness or unfavorableness towards an object, person, situation or thing. This favorableness or unfavorableness in the marketing context would be a product or a service or a brand or any of the 4 P's, and people will have a feeling of liking or disliking towards such products or towards such brands or towards the 4 P's, and this would exhibit in an act of behavior which marketers will use to infer that yes, their brand is liked or disliked. So, it is a consistent form of favorableness or unfavorableness towards an object, and this feeling is actually based on an evaluation of knowledge about the particular object. Now, let us come to the nature of attitudes. Now, attitudes are comprised of 3 components: the knowledge or the cognitive component, the affect or the feeling component, and the behavior or the conative component. So, we have 3 components in attitudes: knowledge or cognition, feeling or affect, and behavior and conation. Now, in terms of consumer attitudes, the consumer's feeling of like or dislike towards the product or the market mix will reflect his attitude. What are the three components and how are they a part of attitude? For example, let us take first the knowledge component. It is reflected in the learned knowledge that the consumer obtains from his interaction with others in the form of communication, whether interpersonal communication or marketing communication. Information here is derived by the customer through his interaction either with the marketer or with informal in personal, so with friends, colleagues, etc. It is also derived as a result of experiences either of himself or of hearing of experiences of others. So this is what we mean by the knowledge or the cognitive component. The second is the feeling component, which is reflected in his evaluation and results in feelings of favorableness or unfavorableness, feelings of like or dislike. So that is what we refer to as the affect component. And the third is the behavioral component, which is reflected in the form of the predisposition to act. Act here meaning purchase or not to purchase. So if we talk about the cognitive component, it is actually wanting to purchase or not wanting to purchase. So these are the three components of attitude. The knowledge component, which comprises the knowledge and the information which he gathers either on himself or from others, either from the marketer or from interpersonal sources, as well as his own experiences. The feeling is the feeling of like or dislike, favorableness or unfavorableness about from his evaluation of the object based on the knowledge, and behavior is the act of the predisposition to act, the feeling to act, to buy or not to buy as expressed by the consumer. Now, put together these three components comprise what we call as an attitude. We will again talk of this in terms of consumer attitude, where knowledge about the product or the brand forms the knowledge component, information about the product from experiences of self, of others, from readings, from sources of information, all of that becomes a part of the cognitive component. Based on this component, you develop a feeling of likingness or dislikingness towards the product and or brand. So that becomes the feeling component or the affect component. And finally, you have the desire to buy or not to buy, and that will become the behavioral or the cognitive component. Now, based on this, we can discuss the nature of attitudes, which we shall do subsequently. Attitudes, first let us discuss first we say that attitudes are directed towards an object. Okay. So any and all attitudes are basically directed towards an object. Now the object here, as we said, could be the product or the service, or it could be any of the 4 P's, be it price or the store or the dealer or the promotion or the advertisement or any form of other communication. So attitudes are basically directed towards an object about which the consumer will develop feelings and beliefs. Second is attitudes have direction. By this we mean that attitudes could either be positive. Consumers could possess attitudes which are favorable or unfavorable, likingness or dislikingness towards a product or a service or a brand. And such attitudes, they vary in intensity, they vary in degree, and they can fall anywhere in a continuum from very favorable to very, very unfavorable. So we have a scale, a continuum where you can place your feelings of likingness or dislikingness on a scale or on a continuum, and you can scale it from very high to very low. The third is attitudes have consistency. They are consistent in nature, particularly with respect to the third component, which is behavior. However, they are not entirely permanent, and attitudes can be changed, especially if the cognitive component gets changed. Okay. This means that in case the consumer gains more knowledge about or newer knowledge about or newer facts about a product or service offering, or he has a new experience with a product or service offering, in that case his knowledge or gets updated in his memory, his already existing facts, already existing beliefs, already existing opinions in his memory could get modified, they could get updated, they could change, and this can ultimately bring about a change in the attitude, and correspondingly it will also bring about a change in the feeling component. So if a consumer witnesses a new experience or is exposed to a new knowledge, the feelings can change from dislike to like, and ultimately attitude towards the product or service or the brand can also undergo a change. So while we say attitudes are consistent, they are stable, however they can be changed if something is done to basically bring about a change in them. So that's how we say that attitudes are consistent, yet we can, of course, while bringing about a change in the knowledge component, we can try and bring about changes in the attitude. The fourth characteristic of attitudes are that attitudes are a learned predisposition. They are based on the knowledge component, they are based on the cognitive component, where the person or the consumer, either a consumer or a prospect, gains information about the product or the brand either on his own or through hearsay from others, either from the marketer's source of communication or from informal interpersonal sources of communication. So he learns from his experiences as well as his others' experiences. So that's why we say attitudes are learned. They are formed as a result of one's experiences, one's interactions with family, with friends, with relatives, with interpersonal communication, as well as information from the marketer in the form of promotion or advertisements or personal selling or the dealer or the salesperson. So attitudes are also impacted by needs, motivations, perceptions and learning. So that's why we say attitudes are a learned predisposition. The next characteristic of attitudes is that they cannot be observed directly. While attitudes are comprised of three components: knowledge, affect and behavior, it is only the third component which can be seen. It is the third component which is visible. Okay, the other two components, knowledge and feeling, are not visible, they cannot be felt, but attitudes, and that is why attitudes cannot be seen, they can only be inferred by the manner in which a person behaves or what he or she says. Thus, if a person buys Colgate and does not buy Pepsodent or disregards Pepsodent, we would say that he has a positive attitude towards Colgate. So attitudes are something where 2 out of 3 components cannot be observed. It is only the behavior which can be observed, and it is through the behavior that we can infer that whether a person has a positive attitude or a negative attitude towards a product or a brand. So that's why we say that attitudes cannot be observed directly. While attitudes can be inferred from a behavior, it is not synonymous to behavior. This is because attitude has 2 other components, which are cognition and affect. Okay, so it has 2 other components, and it reflects a learned predisposition to act favorably or unfavorably. So we say that while attitudes can be inferred from our behavior, it is not synonymous to our behavior. We may have a positive attitude, we may think very highly of a product or a service or a brand, we may have a feeling of likingness towards it, but it may not result in the desired behavior, maybe because of certain kinds of situational influences, maybe shortage of time or financial resources, or it could be also because of the purchase act, being influenced either by other people in the store or by the dealer or by somebody who influences you at the store, a friend who influences you at the store. So social effects or situational effects could have an impact, and so the person continues to have a favorable attitude. He has a strong opinion of the brand, he likes a particular brand, but he does not ultimately end up buying the brand. That is why we say that attitudes they are inferred by behavior, but they are definitely not synonymous to behavior. And the last characteristic of attitudes is that attitudes are situation specific. They occur in a situation. Sometimes, depending on a situation, a person may exhibit a behavior, as I just said, which may be inconsistent with his act. So he may buy something else although he likes something else, or he may buy a Colgate. He may buy a Pepsodent over Colgate because the former is on a sales promotion and gets him a free toothbrush. So it could either be because of social influences or social pressures or situational influences, be it time, be it discounts, etc., where a person may get carried away and ends up buying something else, although he intended to buy something else and he has a positive attitude for something else. So although he has a favorable attitude towards Colgate, but he prefers buying Pepsodent because with that he gets a toothbrush free. So that is how we say that attitudes are situation specific. So if we quickly have a recap, we say that attitudes are directed towards an object. In our case, the 4 P's it has a direction, it could be positive or negative, feeling of like or dislike. It is consistent, although it is consistent, it can be changed. They are learned predisposition, they cannot be observed directly. While they are inferred from our behavior, they are not synonymous to behavior, and finally they are situation specific. Now now let's move on further to discuss the functions of attitudes. Now when we speak about the functions, apart from helping a consumer make evaluations of a product or service, ending up in a purchase decision what to buy or not to buy, attitudes also play other functions. So what are the other functions which attitudes play? Attitudes play four basic functions: the utilitarian function, the ego defensive function, the value expressive function, and the knowledge function. Now the four functions are not mutually exclusive. They cannot be put into four different watertight compartments. In fact, all of them are related, and consumer attitudes are reflective of all the four functions. So let us discuss the four functions subsequently. The utilitarian function. So consumers form positive attitudes towards product or service offerings because they provide a utility, or they have a functional value. In other words, they provide the product or service or brand may provide a rewarding experience through the benefits that it actually provides, and so people begin to have attitude because of the utilitarian function. So consumers form positive attitudes towards product or service because of the utility, because of the functionality, because of the benefits, or because of the rewarding experience that they derive after having used a particular product or service. So that's why we say that consumers the consumers form positive attitudes because of the utilitarian function. Consumers learn to relate a reward with the use of an offering. On the other hand, if the product or service does not provide them a rewarding experience, consumers form a negative attitude towards it. So they form a positive attitude towards something because they find the purchase, consumption and usage as rewarding experience. In case it is not, they will form a negative attitude towards it. So consumers basically form positive attitudes because the particular product or service provides them with a utility or a benefit or a value or a functionality. Second function is the ego defensive function. Consumers form attitudes because it helps them defend their ego, their self-concept or their self-image. For example, if a person is very high on ethnocentrism and he patronizes Indian products, he would have a positive attitude towards Indian brands. He would talk about such brands, he would speak about such brands, he would promote such brands, even if he knows that a foreign brand provides more value. So attitudes are often developed to defend one's own ego. So people develop attitudes also to defend their ego or their self-concept or their self-image. They try to promote something which adds to, enhances with, and is congruent with their self-image and with their ego. The third function which attitudes perform is value expressive function. So positive attitudes are formed when a product or service expresses a person's values and lifestyles, his personality, his self-concept and his image. So this actually is important because the product or the attitude here resulting in product purchase will help him express his values. So in case there is a mismatch between a product image and the consumer's image, a negative attitude is developed, and so we say that attitudes are reflective of one's attitude is reflective of one's value system. Finally, attitudes also are formed when consumers want to reaffirm their knowledge. So we say that attitudes play another function, which is the knowledge function. So attitudes are formed when consumers want to reaffirm their knowledge base and trying to help them ultimately simplify their purchase decision making process. If a consumer thinks positively about a brand, it helps reaffirm his opinion and makes decision making much simpler, much faster. So attitudes basically help you in your making your purchase decisions. It makes your purchase decisions much faster. Attitudes have a component which is the knowledge, and this knowledge here helps you talk about the product, it's how better it is than the others, how much value it can provide to you, and so it reaffirms your knowledge. Now let us discuss the attitudes and the meanings of attitudes in terms let us discuss the function of attitudes and the meaning of such functions with examples. So we have the utilitarian function, which says attitudes are formed because products provide utility. So the object of attitudes here is that such products that provide utility. And examples could be, people could have a positive attitude towards Complan because Complan helps children grow faster and better, or they have a positive attitude towards Pepsodent because Pepsodent fights tooth decay 24 hours a day. So in both these cases, an attitude is formed because the product provides a utility, and so that is how attitude performs a utilitarian function. Attitudes also perform a ego-defensive function. The meaning here is they support a person's self-image or his self-image, his self-concept, and his ego. So such, the object of attitudes here is such products that could relate to and support a person's ego, self-image, and self-concept. So you have Rexona deodorant, which prevents body odor whole day long, or you have close-up toothpaste that prevents bad breath and does not cause any embarrassment when one is with friends. So here, an attitude towards Rexona is formed, or an attitude towards close-up is formed because it helps support a person's ego. It avoids any kind of social embarrassment, and so we say that attitude forms an ego-defensive function. Then we have the value expressive function, which basically means that attitudes reflect values and lifestyle, personality and self-image and self-concept. So the object of such attitudes could be such products that reflect a person's values and lifestyle, personality and self-image and self-concept. So you have Mercedes-Benz, a car for the CEO or for a successful businessman, or you have Dove, which depicts softness and sophistication, or you have Raymond's, which is positioned as suitings for a complete man, exhibiting his status, his style, and his personality and his sophistication. So all of these, if you see attitude towards a Mercedes or a Dove or a Raymond's, is because of the value expressive function. People develop an attitude towards them because it helps them express their values, their lifestyle, their personality, their self-image, and their self-concept. And finally, you have the knowledge function, which is the structuring the knowledge and reaffirming it. So the objects of such attitudes are products that structure knowledge and reaffirm it. They provide conformance, certainty, and reliability. So you have Odomos, a mosquito repellent, which says it's safe for skin, or you have Crocin, which is a safe drug for everyone, the young, the old, or the children. So here it is, attitude towards Odomos or Crocin is formed because of the knowledge that is provided alongside with them while they are being positioned. So that is how we say that the attitudes have 4 different functions which are not mutually exclusive but are related to each other, and all of them help in building and reforming of attitudes. Now let us come to the structural models of attitudes, and we will be discussing it in 2 parts. So we will talk of structural models of attitudes today, where we will be discussing the first 2 theories, and within the second theory as well we will be talking of just 2 theories. So we will speak here of the models of attitudes. Several studies have been conducted, research has been conducted to study the dynamics underlying attitudes, their formation, their change, as well as their relationship with the act of purchase or the act of behavior. So the focus has been basically to understand the formation of attitudes so that you can predict them and you can influence them. Researchers have come up with different models which basically underline the different dimensions of attitudes, of formation of attitudes, the change in attitudes, or how the attitude could be related to the act of purchase. We have a large number of models. The more researched upon and commonly referred to models are the tri-component attitude model, the multi-attribute attitude model, the theory of trying to consume, and the attitude towards the ad model. So you have these 4 models which basically talk about the dimensions underlying the formation of attitudes, the change of attitudes, and how they can be related to the physical act or the act of purchase. Now it's important for the marketers to understand these different models of behavior so that they can, these models of attitude, so that they can understand consumer attitudes and they can predict them and influence them to their advantage. So we shall speak about the tri-component model just now, and we will also speak about 2 of the 3 multi-attribute models in this particular session. So, let us start with the tri-component attitude model. As the name suggests, the model consists of 3 components: the knowledge component, the effect component, and the cognitive component. So, you have these 3 components. You have the knowledge or the cognition component, or you have the feeling or emotional and affect component, and you have the action and the cognitive component. So, if you see, according to the tri-component models, the 3 of them are related to each other. You have the knowledge component, the cognitive component, which comprises the cognition processes that lead to the formation of attitudes. In terms of marketing, the knowledge or the cognitive component of this model consists of consumers' knowledge about the product or service offering and the mix. So, consumers' attitudes will be based, consumers' attitudes are formed on the basis of experiences of their own self, as well as information received from personal sources, which is word of mouth, friends, peers, colleagues, or or impersonal sources like the marketer sources, or through other sources which get retained in the consumer's memory. So, in terms of marketing, the knowledge component or the cognitive component consists of consumers' knowledge about the product and the 4 Ps, and this knowledge is something which he would have gathered either from his own experiences or from experience of others, either through interpersonal communication and word of mouth, or through impersonal communication from the marketer in the form of advertisements and or other print, either in print or in audiovisual media. Now, all of this information is stored in his memory bank, which he would retrieve later as and when required. Now, this information also gets shaped by values, beliefs, opinions, and the consumer begins to perceive that the attitude object, attitude object, that is the product or the brand, possesses certain attributes and possesses certain attributes, and acts of behavior would lead to such outcomes. So, then beliefs and opinions get reinforced repeatedly and finally give rise to attitude. So, this knowledge component, which is also shaped up by not only the knowledge which is received or the experiences which are gathered, but also by our opinions, also by our beliefs. All of this keeps getting reinforced, goes to the memory and gets stored there, and they first give rise to the attitudes. This attitude, which is this knowledge component, gets related to the second component, which is the feeling component or the affect component or the emotional component. Now, talking about the feeling or the emotional or the affect component, it is actually the emotional component of the attitudes. It is understood to be the attitude itself because it depicts emotional states like likingness or dislikingness, positivity or being neutral or negative, or favorableness and unfavorableness. So, in terms of marketing, it is actually a feeling of like or dislike, favorableness or unfavorableness towards a product or a service offering, or towards the brand or towards the mix, and it gets manifest through feelings and resultant experiences like happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, and is also indicative of the consumer's reaction towards the offering and the mix, which subsequently will affect the purchase decision making and the purchase process. So, such reactions and such resultant emotional states also get stored in the memory. Their retrieval, their recall and recollection will impact consumer decision making later on. Now, this leads to the third component, which is the cognition or the behavior, which will be the act of purchase or which will be either to purchase or not to purchase, or to purchase brand X and not to purchase brand Y. Now, based on our knowledge and opinions and beliefs, we had the cognition. Then that gave rise to the affect, which was feeling of like, dislike, or feel positive, neutral and negative feeling, which is now going to have an impact on the actual act. So, the behavior or the cognitive component actually is the outcome of an attitude. As attitudes are formed out of psychographic components, they cannot be seen. The first two components, as we just said, are not expressive. Are not expressive or illustrative. It is only this third component, which is cognitive or behavior, which can be inferred. which can be, it is through this that attitude, it is this component which is seen, and it is through this particular component that attitudes can be inferred. So, the very fact that a person buys a product will illustrate that he has a favorable attitude towards it, and the very fact that he does not buy it means he has either neutral or negative. The very fact that he prefers X over Y means that he is more positive towards X, or he likes X better than Y. So, the conative component is basically illustrative of his tendency to behave, act or not to act, buy or not to buy in particular manner with respect to the attitude object, which will be the product or service, the brand, etc. So, as per this particular model, the cognition and the affect, or the knowledge and the feeling components cannot be seen, they can only be inferred. It is only the conative or the behavioral component which can be seen, and attitudes are inferred through this conative or through behavioral component. So, this is what we mean that the cognation, the knowledge, the beliefs, the opinions having an impact on the feeling, like, dislike, or actual judgment about the product, having an impact on the tendency to, or the decision or the intention to buy or not to buy, etc. So, they all are related with each other, and the act of purchase is further going to act, or the act of behavior is further, act of purchase is further going to result in a feeling of satisfaction or dissatisfaction, and this feeling reaffirms the knowledge base or the cognition, and reaffirms our values or opinions or beliefs about a particular product and or brand. So, this is how the three of them are interrelated to each other. Now, let us talk more about the multi-attribute models. This is, we will talk about this in little detail, where they state that a consumer's attitude towards an object, a product or a service or a brand, or any of the elements of the 4 Ps is a function of the consumer's perception and belief of key attributes, as well as his assessment of the key attributes. So, they say that a consumer's attitude towards an object is based on his perception and belief of key attributes as well as his assessment of the key attributes. So, it is the perception and belief of key attributes as well as the assessment of key attributes. So, these particular models, they try to study attitude in the form of a consumer's perception and belief about key benefits, features or attributes or key characteristics, as well as their assessment of such key attributes, benefits and features and or characteristics. Now, different multi-attribute models have been proposed by various researchers. Numerous variations have been proposed. Among the most famous models are those by the name of Fishbein. So, Martin Fishbein and his associates proposed a series of models which were like the attitude towards object model, the attitude towards behavior model, and the theory of reasoned action model. Now, Martin Fishbein and his fellow colleagues and his associates have proposed many other models as well, but of particular relevance to us are these 3 models: the attitude towards object, the attitude towards behavior, and the theory of reasoned action model. We will be discussing the first 2 theories, the first 2 multi-attribute theories provided by Martin Fishbein in this session, and we shall be doing the 3rd theory in the next session. The basic premise of these theories is that the attitude is a function of a consumer's perception of key attributes as well as his assessment of these key attributes. So, beginning with the first model, which is attitude towards object model. Now, the particular model says that a consumer's attitude towards a particular product or service offering or a brand is a function of absence and presence of certain attributes and the corresponding evaluation. So, here we study attitudes in terms of the evaluation of product specific beliefs and evaluations. In other words, if we talk about this particular model, it says that while evaluating an offering, consumers' attitude will be based on 1, the presence of certain attributes and the aggravation of a consumer's belief of each of these, and the overall evaluation of the relevance of each of these attributes in providing necessary benefits and gains. So what we are trying to say is, in simple words, that a person has an attitude towards an object will be based on, one, the presence of certain attributes, and two, the relevance of these attributes in the minds of the consumer. So one, it is basically the presence or absence of certain attributes, and two, how relevant and how important and how significant is the presence of such attributes in the minds of the consumer. So one is presence of attributes, two is evaluation of these attributes. So a person will have a positive attitude towards a particular product in case the product has, or a brand, in case the product or brand has certain characteristics or attributes which the consumer feels are valuable or are relevant. So in case the particular product or service offering or the brand has certain attributes, benefits and features, and he finds these attributes, benefits and features to be of value or to be of relevance, the consumer will automatically have a positive attitude towards this particular brand. So this is what we mean by the attitude towards the object model. One, presence and absence of attributes. Two, evaluation of these attributes. Or so here it is, one, the presence of attributes, two, the overall evaluation and relevance of these attributes. So if we have an example here, let us take an example of a Complan as a health drink. So a lady is there, she wants her child to grow faster, very taller, healthier. So she has a positive attitude towards Complan if Complan contains vitamins and minerals, and if she gives importance or if she gives value to such vitamins and minerals. So this particular model is depicted in the form of an equation where attitude for Complan will be a summation of BI EI, where the overall attitude for the object will be based on the summation of the strength of the belief that the object contains the ith attribute, which means the likelihood that Complan is a nutritious health drink with vitamins and minerals. EI is the evaluative criteria associated with the ith attribute. So how good or bad is the nutritious health drink with the vitamins and minerals? So summation will basically be indicative of the n salient attributes over which BI and EI combinations are summated. So the consumers basically will tend to have a favorable attitude towards such offerings and towards such brands which have sufficient number of attributes which are deemed to be positive or which are deemed to be very, very important. On the other hand, they will have a negative attitude towards those offerings or brands which do not have sufficient amount of desired attributes, or they have many negative attributes. Now let us move to the second model, which is the attitude towards a behavior model. Now this particular model focuses on the individual's act of behavior towards the object rather than the mere feeling towards the object. So the basic assumption of this model is that a person may have a positive feeling or a positive attitude towards a particular object, but he has a negative feeling or negative attitude towards the purchase of that particular product. He has a negative attitude towards the intention for buying such a product or service offering. Okay, so what it actually means is that the positive attitude towards a product or service offering or towards a particular brand may not always lead to the act of purchase. So here the focus here is not only on the evaluation of the characteristic or the feature, but also of the act of purchase. So it is basically, it focuses on a person's act of behavior towards the attitude object rather than mere feeling towards it. So positive attitude towards an offering may not necessarily lead towards an intention to buy or may not end up as an act of purchase. So that is how even if you have a positive feeling towards a particular product or brand, you may not actually end up buying it, or you may have a negative attitude towards intention of buying. So what it means is you may have a positive attitude towards a brand, but that does not mean that it is going to end up into an act of purchase. There is a positive attitude towards the brand, but a negative attitude towards intention or to buy the brand or to ultimately buy the brand. So this is the basic premise for this model. For example, let us take the example here of a Philips home theater. A consumer is aware that a Philips home theater would lead to better sound effects, better visual effects, bigger screen. He will also be aware of the high price and may decide against the act of purchase. So either he would not have the money, or he may not think it wise to spend so much of money. So thus, while he has a positive attitude towards and positive feeling attitude towards the product offering, he likes it, he is aware of the better effects, the better visual effects, the better screen, he is aware aware of all that, but he does not have a positive feeling to indulge in the act of purchase. So here we have this particular model which can be depicted as an equation where attitude is a summation again of BI, where attitude is the overall measure of effect for or against carrying out the act of behavior. BI is the strength of the belief that an ith action will lead to an outcome, and EI is the evaluation of the ith outcome. So, which is the BI is the purchase of a home theatre would lead to better audiovisual impact, and the EI is the favorableness of a bigger screen, better audiovisual effects, or the unfavorableness of the cost. So here you have the summation where the n salient outcomes over where the summation is indicative that there is n salient outcomes over which the B and E combinations are summated. So consumers would tend to have a favorable attitude towards the product or the brand, but they have a negative attitude towards the act of purchase. So this is where we see that, you know, although consumers may have a positive feeling or positive attitude or a feeling of likingness towards the brand, it may not actually end up in the purchase activity. It may not lead up to the end of the act of purchase. That is why we say that we discussed earlier while discussing the nature of attitudes, that attitudes can be inferred from behavior, but attitudes are not synonymous of behavior. The very fact that here, you know, you have a positive attitude, but it does not result in a favorable behavior or in a favorable or a purchase for which is a favorable which would be favorable for the shop for the seller. So it's a favorable attitude towards the brand, but does not actually result in a favorable outcome in terms of a purchase. So that is why we say that there is this particular multi-attribute theory speaks of the relevance of the attribute as well as the importance of the act of purchase. So here the consumer has a favorable attitude towards the object, but he does not have a favorable attitude towards the act of purchase, and that is why we speak of this particular theory as the attitude towards the behavior model. This brings us to an end of this particular session. Let us go in for references for further reading. ASEL, Consumer Behavior and Marketing Action, 4th edition, PWS Kent. Loudon and Della Bitta, Consumer Behavior, 4th edition, 2002, Tata McGraw-Hill. Kotler and Keller, Marketing Management, 13th edition, 2009, Pearson. Peter and Olson, Consumer Behavior and Marketing Strategy, 7th edition, McGraw-Hill. Schiffman and Kanu, Consumer Behavior, 8th edition, 2004, Pentris Hall. Wong and Richard, How Advertising Works, a Planning Model, Journal of Advertising. Wong and Richard, How Advertising Works, a Planning Model Revisited, Journal of Advertising Research. And Wells and Prensky, Consumer Behavior, John Wiley and Son, 1996. Coming to frequently asked questions. Define consumer attitudes, discuss the composition of an attitude. So you will first say what consumer attitudes are, and then you will speak about the three components of attitudes: the knowledge or the cognitive, the feeling or the affect, and the behavior or the cognitive. Question 2, discuss the nature of consumer attitudes. So you will discuss the different characteristics of consumer attitudes. And question 3, discuss the tri-component model, attitude model. So here you will speak about the knowledge component, the affect component, and the behavior component, and how the three of them are related to each other and how three of them affect each other. Coming to a test or a quiz, section 8, true false. Attitudes can only be inferred from what people say or what they do and how they behave. So is this a true statement or a false statement? This is a true statement. Attitudes can only be inferred from what people say or what they do and how they behave. Statement question 2, a consumer may have a positive feeling towards an attitude object, but he may have a negative attitude regarding his intention for buying such a product or service offering. So is this a true or a false statement? This is again a true statement. He may have a positive attitude towards an object, but he may have a negative attitude regarding his intention of buying such a product or service offering. Fill in the blanks. Question 1. Dash may be defined as an inner feeling of favorableness or unfavorableness towards a product or service offering, and the 4 Ps. So the answer to this is consumer attitudes. Consumer attitudes may be defined as an inner feeling of favorableness or unfavorableness towards a product or service offering, and the 4 Ps. Question 2. The Dash model states that a consumer's attitude towards the attitude object, product or service offering, brand, elements of the marketing mix is a function of a consumer's perception and belief of the key attributes as well as its assessment of the key attributes. So the answer to this is the multi-attribute model. So multi-attribute models state that a consumer's attitude towards an attitude object is a function of a consumer's perception and belief of the key attributes as well as the assessment of the key attributes. Question 3, the dash model states that the consumer's attitude towards a product or service offering or a brand is a function of the presence or absence of certain attributes and the corresponding evaluation. So the answer to this is the attitude towards the object. So attitude towards the object model states that the consumer's attitude towards a product or service offering or a brand is a function of the presence or absence of certain attributes and the corresponding evaluation. Short answers. Question 1, attitudes are composed of 3 components, name them. So the 3 components are the knowledge component, the feeling component and the behavioral component. You can also say the cognitive component, the affect component and the cognitive component. Question number 2, mention the 4 functions that are played by attitudes. So the 4 functions are utilitarian function, the ego defensive function, the value expressive function and the knowledge function. Name the multi-attribute attitude models. So the Fishman's 3 multi-attribute models are the attitude towards the object model, the attitude towards the behavior model and the theory of reasoned action model. So the answers are here. So this brings us to a conclusion of this particular session on consumer attitudes. We shall be continuing with consumer attitudes in the next session. Thank you.